تهتف بنا أغيثوني، وآلاف من الأسرى وآلاف المساجين تنادي الأمة الكبرى وتهتف بالملايين، تقول لهم إلى القدس إليها قبلة الدين، إلى حرب تدك الظلم تزلق روح صهيوني. إلى حرب تدك الظلم تزلق روح صهيوني، وترفع في سماء الكون أعلام فلسطين، وتهدر كلمتي تمضي فلسطيني فلسطيني فلسطيني.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Good morning, my dear brothers and sisters. Distinguished participants, first of all, I thank Allah, God the Almighty, to give us strength and health to be here today. It is indeed a great honor for me to be here today and to be in the company of such distinguished guests and experts in their field. My sincere thanks go to the European Network to support the right for the Palestinian prisoners to be free, right for all and not South 21. And to all those who have contributed to this conference and work to ensure the Palestinian prisoners issue gets the global attention it deserves. As we know, the conference is taking place against the backdrop of violence and turmoil in the Middle East, and most recently, the devastating earthquake and tsunami in Japan and its surrounding Pacific countries. My thoughts are with all those who have lost their lives, and we pray that peace and stability will come in the not too distant future. As the battles for freedom rage on in the Middle East, our commitment to highlighting Israeli continuous violation of human rights of the Palestinians continues unabated. Such as development distributed the clear and urgent, in the contrary to the ongoing phenomenon in the region, the recent decision by the United States to veto on the UN Security Council resolution against the Israeli settlement was a disappointing and undemocratic development. Such a development demonstrated the clear and urgent need for reform and for greater democracy within the UN Security Council, notably in the context of passing and enforcing resolution. Distinguished participants, a just and lasting resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is something we all wish to see. International efforts to bring peace to the region have been numerous. The Madrid Framework, the Roadmap for Peace, and the Arab Peace Initiatives are being just 3 examples. It is my hope that this conference will further contribute to the peace process. There will be no peace in the world without peace in Palestine. Have been held, and the international community is starting to pay more attention to this important human rights issue. But according to the recent data, the Israeli authority continue to imprison and detain thousands of Palestinians, including women and young girls. It means that tangible result remains questionable. Distinguished participants, in my role as woman parliamentarian and as president of CCW of IPU, I'm committed to defending the rights of Palestinian prisoners, particularly women who are currently detained in Israeli jails. I always have a strong excluding women from playing a meaningful role in the life of their country amounts, in a sense, to excluding half of that country's potential. I fully support the declaration of 2011, the year to release Palestinian women prisoners and detainers. Palestinian women play a vital role in the struggle against Israeli occupation and have, throughout the past 60 years of conflict, consistently been victims of serious human rights abuses by the Israeli security services. The majority of Palestinian women in detention are subjected to various kinds of torture or ill treatment during their arrest. Detention or interrogation reports of beating, insult, threats, intrusive body searches, sexual harassment, and psychological abuse are widespread. Their terms of imprisonment are harsh, their cells dirty, overcrowded, and access to even basic healthcare services is limited, as what we saw just now in the Nelly's and Gafa's film. The majority of such conditions are in clear violation of UN standard minimum rules for the treatment of prisoners. Under this regulation, the Israeli authority has a duty to provide, amongst other things, adequate healthcare, especially pregnant detainees, learning materials, and access to education for girls under 18 and open family visit. In addition, the ill treatment of female detainees by the Israeli authority violates a number of international human rights and humanitarian law, such as the UN Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman or Degrading Treatment or Punishment, and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. The Fourth Geneva Convention concerning the protection of civilians in the time of war is also being blatantly disregarded by Israel. Distinguished participants, having listened attentively to a number of moving testimony during the roundtable yesterday, and watching the Nelly's and Gafa film, and listening to Sarah speak just now, I share the urgency to work more on this issue, and this is why events such as this conference are crucial if international pressure on the solidarity networks, on the Israeli government is to be stepped up. By strengthening our advocacy and solidarity network, and by lobbying harder for the fair and equal treatment of the Palestinian people, we can sow the seed for change. In light of these harrowing tales of abuse and injustice, it is more crucial than ever that the international community pulls together to make meaningful progress on this issue. We are gathering here with one common objective: to stop human rights abuse and violence toward Palestinian prisoners and detainees. One tangible result that we can come up from this conference is by formulating a number of recommendations to be submitted to various international human rights mechanisms and IPU relevant mechanisms, including for monitoring mission and field visits to various Israeli prisoners and detainers centers. After all, Palestinian issue is not just a matter for Arab and Muslim world. It is a human rights cause which mobilizes humanity. Every human being, regardless of race and religion, has the right to be free from oppression, ill treatment, and discrimination. Distinguished participants, since my own childhood in Indonesia, the struggle of the Palestinians has always been remains an important part of our national history. Our Constitution is mandated us to contribute to the eradication of colonialism in the world. And until now, Indonesia is still consistent in keeping its commitment, including through the policy of no diplomatic relation with Israel. Indonesia continues to expand its role on the international stage, being member of G20 and as chairman of ASEAN are among the few. We, the parliamentarians, are in the front row in carrying out parliamentary diplomacy and constructively play an important role in generating support for important international issues such as the Palestinian struggle against oppression and occupation. On that note, Indonesia would be honored to invite all of you to the second International Conference on Palestine next year in our country and contribute further to protecting the human rights of Palestinians. In closing, may I thank you all again for your attention and your effort to make this conference a success. Let us work together to achieve our dream of seeing the right of Palestinian prisoners and detained is being protected in the independent Palestinian and Israel living side by side in peace, security, and most important, dignity. Thank you.
Invitation, and firstly my congratulations to all those that have put so much effort into organising this absolutely brilliant conference here in Geneva. The first time there's been an international conference solely dedicated to the issue of Palestinian prisoners, and what city more appropriate than Geneva, the home of so many hopes, and the UN being the place of so many disappointments for so long, particularly when the Palestinian people. And the conference and the discussion about the rights of prisoners and the oppression, their torture and their ill treatment takes place in the context of the illegal occupation of the West Bank, the encirclement of Gaza and the imprisonment of virtually all of the people of Gaza. But it also takes place in the context of those Palestinians living often in desperate poverty in refugee camps in Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and so many places all around the world. The millions of Palestinians living in the diaspora, all with the hope of one day returning home to a free, independent, recognised state of Palestine. The treatment of prisoners is symptomatic of the way in which the occupation takes place. The illegal detention, the administrative detention, the solitary confinement, the torture, the lack of visits, the lack of medical support, the lack of any kind of prisoners' association in many cases, and the torture which isn't just the physical torture, but is also the torture of not knowing. There is nothing worse than a state that takes people from the street, places them in prison on charges they know not what they are, for a length of time they know not what it is, and they just waste their lives away. It's those people, those victims, that we're expressing our solidarity with here today. But we're also expressing our solidarity with the families of prisoners, because everyone that's put in prison, their family is put in prison as well, because their life is put on hold, their freedom, their opportunities are also curtailed as a result of it. So we have to fight this thing with international law. The occupation is illegal, the imprisonment is illegal, the walls are illegal, the settlements are illegal, the bombing of Gaza is illegal, the use of phosphorus bombs is illegal. All these things are illegal in international law. Any country in the world that commits such dreadful acts would be pilloried, would be isolated, would have sanctions placed against them. But in the case of Israel, trade goes on, aid goes on, recognition goes on, as though nothing has happened. Well, we are going to change that by taking up the cause of those elected representatives of the Palestinian people who are put in prison. As my friend told us from the Interparliamentary Union, the work that we're doing there. But I also say to you, we've got to get through to people all around the world who are not as well informed about Palestine as they should be. I was involved in the anti-apartheid campaign from the time of being a very young man, growing up in England. We campaigned against apartheid and it was difficult. People didn't understand what it was about, didn't understand the concept. When we took up the case of individual prisoners, particularly Nelson Mandela, people understood. They could see it through the eyes of one individual. So what I hope we can do from this conference is demand international law, demand sanctions, demand rights, but also say to our friends all over the world, take up the case of each individual prisoner. Tell the world their story. Tell the world the brutality. Through that prism, so many people will understand the terrible history of Nakba and the treatment of the Palestinian people. A great Irish nationalist, James Connolly, said, "One nation that oppresses another cannot itself be free." All those countries that are trading, aiding and supporting the Israeli military are part of that oppression. Let's keep the campaign going and recognise that times are changing all across North Africa and all across the Middle East. Millions are marching. They're demanding their peace, their justice and their freedom. 2 weeks ago I was in Tunisia, and the students in the centre of the city, the rally for the release of the prisoners. The first flag they raised was, yes, obviously the Tunisian flag, then the Palestinian flag.
Of Israelis to win. And the clear fact must not be hidden behind the walls of silence. We, in Federation of Islamic Organizations in Europe, send from this conference in Geneva our greetings, admiration to all male and female prisoners in Israeli jails. Those deprived of liberty. We as Muslims of Europe believe it's our duty to stand by them in their just case, doing all possible efforts for their support. We also express our solidarity of Muslims of Europe with the families of the prisoners, who almost represent the whole Palestinian community. It's rare to find a Palestinian family without one prisoner, sometimes two, sometimes more and more. We are looking forward to seeing and to recognizing an active role of both European and international communities. For the sake of justice to the prisoners, to put an end to this series of continuous arrests, showing not actual courts by the occupation authorities. We are confident that the civil society in the world today could put the issue in the spotlight and pay attention of the official to their responsibilities. We in Federation of Islamic Organizations all of you to raise the awareness of this issue and support the Palestinian human rights of prisoners. Without forgetting that Palestine itself is placed in a large prison of sea, closure, policies, fences, barriers, complicated restrictions, which interfere with the right of the people to move and to communicate with the external world. By holding this important conference, we believe that it could be a concrete indication on the pulse of the real humanity of this world. Practical test of the will of the international community to uphold the right and establish the justice وَمَا ذَلِكَ عَلَى اللَّهِ بِعَزِيزٍ. Finally, we wish you a successful and effective gathering. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help you. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
Very important to me to be in Geneva these days, taking part in the first international conference on Palestinian prisoners. I was elected the first time in my country as a member of parliament, and I want very strongly to fight for human rights. First of all, I would like to congratulate the organizers on this initiative under the slogan, Working for Justice. In my opinion, this is the best opportunity to highlight the effort as well as to unite our power against the brutal action which takes place in Israeli prisons against Palestinian detainees. By watching the lived testimonies from prisoners and having released the effects of imprisonment of prisoners and on their families, the only thing I can say is we have to take a clear stand against this cruelty. And we must take action against the brutal conditions in Israeli prisons, which violate the fundamental human rights. As a member of a Greek parliament and representative of the European citizen, I strongly support this initiative. It is an ethical and political obligation towards the Palestinian people because Palestinian prisoners are going under illegal and inhumane punishment methods that are wrong on international and human levels. Since the Israeli occupation of the rest of the Palestinian territories in 1967, Israel has detained more than 750,000 Palestinians. This number includes dozens of women and children. Since Al-Aqsa uprising in 2000 year, more than 70,000 detainees were taken into custody by Israelis. This statistic includes 820 women and 8,000 children. I would like this minute to congratulate for the idea that next year will belong to women prisoners. We are also between October 2000 and April 2009, approximately about 7,000 Palestinian children between the ages of 12 and 18 were arrested by the Israeli authorities, according to Defense for Children International Palestine section. They were held in detention and interrogation centers as well as in prisons. After the age of 14, Palestinian children are tried as adults in violation of international law. Police in Jerusalem are systematically breaking the law by arresting stone-throwing children at night and interrogating them without their parents. We know that children and teenagers had been dragged out of their beds in the middle of the night or arrested in their neighborhoods by undercover detectives and special security forces. Taken in for questioning while handcuffed and unscorted by their parents, were threatened and humiliated by their interrogators, and some of them were even subject to physical violence. We have to take immediately actions against children and teenagers' abuse and mistreatment. At the present, there are more than 6,700 detainees in Israel's prisons, distributed amongst more than 20 locations. These prisons lack the minimum required standards that are defined by international treaties and agreements. also due to the physical torture which prisoners are exposed to. Many of them are suffering from dangerous and untreatable disease that will eventually lead to their deaths. Detainees are held in overcrowded prison camps that are often threadbare and do not provide of adequate shelter against extreme weather conditions. Prisoners are not provided adequate food rations, neither in quantity or quality, nor are provided with clean clothes or adequate cleaning supplies. Many of the detainees currently being held in military detention camps were injured during their arrest and have not been provided the necessary medical attention with those who suffer from chronic illness. I strongly believe that Palestinian prisoners need to be released and not arrested without trial, to have justice in the court, to have health observations, to have visits from their families, to have visits from the Red Cross. No more children and women in prison, no political prisoners. All of us who participate in this conference have ethical and political obligation to act democratically towards our national parliament and European Parliament to release all the political prisoners. Thank you very much.
Important conference. It's an honour for me as an Irish Republican and as an Irish person to join with you at this historic conference, the first international conference for Palestinian prisoners, and particularly Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails. As an Irish Republican activist, I am a former prisoner myself. I am very happy, always happy. I am always happy to find myself among my sisters and my brothers from Palestine. We are one family and we will never, ever be separated. I have listened to the stories, the testimony of the families, particularly the daughter of the political prisoner, and you couldn't fail to be moved. But it's a story that I can tell you I've heard before, because it is the story always of what happens to the oppressed by the oppressor when they're allowed to oppress people, and they must be stopped. Now, the oppressor may think they're strong when they do that to our prisoners in jail. They may think our prisoners are weak, and they may think when they attack their families that makes them strong. But I say this to every tyrant in this world: one day, our day will come, and your day will come, and tyrants will fall. It's very fitting that today we gather on this conference because, for one reason, 30 years ago this month, my comrades, the Irish Republican prisoners in jail in Ireland, led by Bobby Sands, began the historic hunger strike. It was a terrible struggle in which we lost inside the jail. 10 of my comrades were to die on the hunger strike, and many, many more of my comrades would die in action on the streets and in the fields of Ireland and elsewhere, as they took the struggle to the British enemy, and they took it in one of the most intense periods of resistance that we had seen for many, many years. That happened when I was sitting in an English jail, and it was a very hard time, it was a very emotional time, and it was a very painful time. Because as I sat there in an English jail, I had to watch my people being butchered, I had to watch my comrades in prison dying, and I had to see this happening by oppressors who acted with impunity. But one thing I did not see, and comrades and friends, Palestinians will never see: you will not see your people being beaten, and we were never beaten, and you will not be beaten. The prison and the prisoners have become a site of struggle, or a front of struggle. And it was a site of struggle that we didn't choose. It was chosen by our enemies. It was chosen by the oppressors. They thought that by picking on prisoners sitting alone in jails, that they could break our people. They thought they could break our prisoners. They thought that by doing that, by breaking the families and our communities, that they could break our struggle. And we look back now, and how wrong could they have been? Because when we look back from today, and this is the message of hope I want to bring to this conference, when we look back from today, the fact is that the prison that they thought would become our graveyard became their graveyard. Directly from the heroism of our prisoners, directly from the support of their families, directly from the solidarity of our communities and the international community, directly from all of that came the victories that we are able to see in my country and Ireland today, where our people can live in the middle of a real, genuine peace process that's taking us towards freedom. Our country, as I stand here, is being reunited, and I'm pleased to be playing a part of that. Our freedom is being reclaimed. Some of the more prominent former prisoners from our country are now playing prominent roles within that. One of the most famous would be Martin McGuinness, one of the leaders of Republican resistance in the north of Ireland. He is now the joint First Minister of the northern part of our country. Gerry Adams, our leader, has just taken the largest group of Sinn Féin politicians into the Southern Parliament after the recent elections that we've seen for decades. Our struggle for freedom has moved to a new phase, a peaceful phase, but a phase that is going to deliver our freedom, and I assure you, we will see from this process, we will see the freedom of the people of Palestine. The black days of 30 years ago, and they were black days for us, but that was the darkness, the blackness of the darkness you see before the morning, before the dawn, because it was the beginning of the end for our oppressors. They were broken by our prisoners. It was not our families, but they who were broken by their attacks. And it was not our communities, but their resolution that was broken by the solidarity, the dignity and the strength of the prisoners, their families and our community. It was our community who went out and elected Bobby Sands as he lay on his deathbed, elected him to the British Parliament, and proved to the world that the IRA and the Irish resistance was a resistance of freedom fighters, and that we were not terrorists any more than the Palestinians or anything other than freedom fighters. So this is a very important struggle, and this is a very important conference. And I can assure you, as a former prisoner, that your support is absolutely vital. Your support is vital because it will lift the morale of Palestinian prisoners. It will give the support that you must give to the families of prisoners will lift the morale of the prisoners and lift the morale of the families. And the support that you give by telling the truth of what's happening will give strength to the Palestinians in the diaspora and the Palestinians within the occupied territories or in the refugee camps or within Gaza, the West Bank, or all those. So you must make sure that you take part in this struggle, because it befalls on us who are outside to make sure that the Zionists do not isolate our prisoners, do not victimize and attack our families and their families, and do not continue to occupy your territories. This is a battleground, as I said, that was chosen by your enemies. They decided to kidnap your loved ones, your men, your women and your children, and to put them into jails. They decided to take them so far away from their families and to treat them so abominably in order to punish their families. And that, of course, as has been said, is an illegal collective punishment on a community. But the fact is, no matter how many people they take away, no matter how many people they torture, no matter how many people they jail, if you give the strength and support to the Palestinian people, they will not abandon this struggle. They will take this struggle to new levels, and I can assure you that they will gain the release of their prisoners. You heard from Jeremy Corbyn, a British MP earlier. He was one of the most principled men that I've ever met, and still is. And of course was a great supporter of our prisoners when we were in jail in England. He stood up as an Englishman in the British Parliament in support of our prisoners. And you've got no greater friend than Jeremy as you have here today, and I know he will bring the dedication he brought to our cause to your cause. But I can tell you he was part and parcel of something that happened after the hunger strike, after the heroism of our prisoners, after the banding together of our communities, when they turned the tables, as I said, onto our British oppressors. And many Irish people had been arrested and tortured and thrown into jail by the English authorities. And there were innocent Irish people in British jails at that time. And Jeremy Corbyn was one of a number of people who, along with the Irish community, threw off the fear that many people had felt up to then because of the oppression. Threw that off, campaigned, and forced the release of those innocent people. And all of those were important steps. The fight for the rights of the prisoners, for their human rights, were important steps in the freedom struggle in Ireland. They weren't just humanitarian issues, although there's nothing wrong with being involved in humanitarian issues, but they were vital steps in the peace process. So I appeal to everyone here. I offer my solidarity and support and linkage with the Palestinian people as we all appeal for people to stand by the prisoners, stand by the political prisoners, stand by their families, stand by their communities, and break down any isolation. Publicise the reality of what is happening to them. And Jeremy mentioned a way of doing that, I think it was Jeremy, by focusing in on individual prisoners. This can be a good way of letting people personalise and understand the story better than talking just in general. You can find ways of doing that. But break down the isolation, and in doing that, you break down the strength of the oppressor, who likes to hide behind phrases, who likes to hide behind powerful media, who likes to hide behind powerful organisations, but who cannot be allowed to get away with this oppression. I met the outrageous attacks on families, which are nothing more than collective punishment and punishment of innocent people. Because although the throwing of a prisoner into a jail for something they didn't do, or to throw them into the treatment that they do with these people and keep them in isolation, that itself is cruel and inhuman treatment and constitutes torture and is illegal. But more than that, there is no justification for the torture that is directed against their families, who are forced to travel many miles, to be turned away at a checkpoint, or to find that the loved one is not allowed to see them at the whim of a guard or a security person. That is a collective punishment on those people. And I heard the stories. I had the great privilege of going into Gaza just after Operation Cast Lead, along with the European Road to Hope convoy to bring medical aid into Gaza. And I met there the families of political prisoners. I met one woman whose husband had been taken to jail when she was expecting a child. The child had never seen the father before he was taken to jail. And sadly, the child was to be killed by the Israelis in Operation Cast Lead. And so that child was born and grew up without ever seeing their father. We must make sure that doesn't happen again. I'm just going to finish very, very quickly, just telling you something personal as to why this is so close to my heart and why it's so important to me. As I said, I was in an English jail in the 1980s, and it was a terrible time when my comrades were dying at home. And I was alone in a jail and I felt isolated. But I saw a photograph in a newspaper when I was in jail, and it was from Gaza, and it was the women of Gaza. And the women of Gaza were holding up the placards with the names of our hunger strikers, of our martyrs. They were standing in support of our prisoners. The Palestinian people and the Palestinian mothers reached out to me in my prison cell. I reach out now to Palestinians. Every day that I breathe, I will stand, I will do one thing, and I want you all to do the same. I will do one thing for Palestine. Because I am on this march with you, the long march to freedom, until such times as your prisoners come home, as the Israelis leave your lands, as you are allowed to return to your home. And I say to you, inshallah, I will walk with you through the streets of Al-Aqsa.
السيد عضو البرلمان عن حزب اليسار في الاتحاد الفيدرالي السويسري السيد جوزيف سيريانس. السيد عضو البرلمان ايضا عند رئيس حزب القدر، رئيس الحزب جون شابير، فليتفضل. شيخ الأسرى الفلسطينيين الشيخ رائد صلاح. السيدة الدكتورة نور حياتي علي. أدعو السادة والسيدات المكرمين والمكرمات للبقاء على المنصة المحامي الفرنسي محامي الدفاع عن حقوق الأسرى الفلسطينيين جوليان دوبيير فليتفضل. كل المكرمين يتفضلوا إلى المنصة الرئيسية. رئيس الأمانة العامة لمؤتمر فلسطيني أوروبا السيد عادل عبد الله. السياسي الأيرلندي السيد جيري ماكلوفن. أتمنى أن يكون كل الضيوف المكرمين هذا تكريم على الكلمات الطيبة هو دافع لنا ولهم جميعا لوضع هذه الكلمات حيز التنفيذ من خلال برامج تعرف بواقع الأسرى الفلسطينيين وتنهي هذه المعاناة. والمكرمين على المنصة أيضا سنكرمهم ونكرمكم بفقرة فنية، لأن الذي يتضامن مع قضية الأسرى يتضامن بالقانون محاميا، يتضامن بالمرافعة عنهم في برلماناته، وكذلك بالموسيقى. أدعو المغني الموسيقي المعروف على الصعيد السويسري والأوروبي السيد ميشيل بولير ليعزف معزوفة.
Blindés au carrefour, policiers et soldats, les femmes qui défilent sans crainte et poings levés. Elles viennent des banlieues de tôle et de ciment et demandent enfin salaire et dignité. Sur l'avenue plus loin courent les jeunes gens, ivres d'un vent nouveau, ils crient la liberté. La peur a changé de camp, l'impossible est arrivé. C'est un moins que rien, un marchand de 4 saisons, par un grain de sable parmi les méprisés, qui, se donnant la mort, façon de dire non, a fait se réveiller un pays tout entier. Et sa flamme insensée s'élève et se répand, de Carthage à Germa, et tout est embrasé. Et le peuple est debout tandis que les tyrans, là, tremblent à leur tour, comme ils ont fait trembler. La peur a changé de camp, l'impossible est arrivé. J'ai vu des hommes doux qui sortaient de prison, ils parlaient de torture et de membres brisés, d'épouses assassinées par des bourreaux sans nom, d'une jeunesse enfuie qu'on leur avait volée. J'en ai vu revenir d'un exil de 20 ans, dans des villes de brume, ils n'ont rien retrouvé ici, rien que des ombres. Et pourtant, tous voyaient l'avenir comme un matin d'été. La peur a changé de camp. L'impossible est arrivé. Dans les rues de Tunis, j'ai vu de beaux humains. Le courage de l'un nourrit celui du frère. Ils marchaient assurés, tête haute certains, d'écrire avec leur vie des pages de lumière. Ils n'avaient que leurs mains pour chasser les voleurs. Ils n'avaient rien à perdre et ils ont tout gagné. Et ce qu'ils ont fait, eux, leur victoire du est arrivé. La peur, parmi, n'est plus là. L'impossible arrivera.
Bravo.
الحضور ونقول لهم بأننا أيضا نغني للأسرى ونغني للحرية. الأغنية التي نعرفها جميعا الآن مع بعض إن شاء الله نغنيها يا ظلام الليل. أنا هو الظلام يا ظلام السجن خيم إننا هو الظلام ليس بعد الليل إلا فجر مجد يتسامى ليس بعد الليل إلا فجر مجد يتسامى. لأنه أحسن مني وأفضل مني، لأنه هو من يغني بقلب، نحن نغني بمشاعرنا بعقولنا، ولكن هؤلاء يغنوا بقلوبهم. فقرة مع الأطفال الفلسطينيين يغنوا للأسرى الفلسطينيين. نترككم أيضا هدية لكم وهدية لكل الأسرى ولكل أسر الأسرى، لأنه لا يوجد أصدق من يعبر عن مشاعره من هؤلاء، من الأطفال، من الزهور.